viewers, you're welcome on the program Health 247, and I am your host, Irene Okechukwu, and this program is everything pertaining your health. And today we have a nutritionist who is also a program officer on food policy program with Kappa. She is Mrs. Bukola Odele. You're welcome on the program, Mrs. Bukola.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So can you tell our viewers a bit about Kappa and what Kappa stands for?
Right. So CAPA in full stands for Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa. It's a non-profit organization as well as an activist organization that advocates for the rights of vulnerable populations across the world, and especially in Nigeria. So what we do is we drive policies as well as we drive policies that impact on the rights, that impact on the lives of vulnerable people in Nigeria. And our areas of intervention include public health. On the public health arm, we actually have two campaigns. That's the Salt Targets campaign, and that's targeted towards working on policies that will help Nigerians to reduce their salt intake. And then in reducing salt intake, it means that we're also trying to reduce the burden of hypertension and cardiovascular disease in the country. Furthermore, we also have another policy area where we're working on, which is the sugar sweetened beverages. So we know that sugar sweetened beverages have the tendency to expose people to diseases like diabetes, obesity, cancer, dental problems, and just to mention a few.
All right.
So now the policy is targeted at let's put a tax on sugar sweetened beverage to reduce consumption. So when people reduce the intake of sugar, because sugar is also a nutrient, you know? So when we reduce the intake of sugar, we are able to curb the burden of diabetes, obesity in Nigeria. And of course, we know that already the government is spending quite a lot on healthcare. And then due to the economic situation, we have people who cannot even access basic healthcare. However, these interventions are intended at preventing people from consuming too much of these nutrients of concern. One of them is salt, the other is sugar. The other is fats. So that's what we do, all in a bid to reduce the burden of non-communicable diseases in Nigeria.
You are doing a lot more. So today, moving on, our topic for today, we are talking on addressing malnutrition in Nigeria, the challenges and the solutions. So looking at this topic, can you give us an overview of how we can address malnutrition in Nigeria, because it's a common problem. It's what people face, especially in the rural setting.
Absolutely. So malnutrition, of course, is a global problem. It's more prevalent in low and middle income countries like Nigeria. And when we talk about malnutrition, we're talking about a situation whereby there's an imbalance between the quantity of nutrients that our body needs and what our body gets. In other words, there's an amount of each nutrient which the body needs to function optimally. And there's a question of, is the body getting enough or less? Are we taking in too much, much more than the body needs, or less than the body requires? So in the case of malnutrition, we have overnutrition and undernutrition.
So where are we now?
So in Nigeria, I would say that peculiar to Nigeria, Nigeria is actually suffering from a triple burden of malnutrition, which means that we're battling with undernutrition in the form of wasting, stunting, and micronutrient deficiency. When I talk of wasting, I'm talking of protein, energy malnutrition. There's a deficiency of protein and energy in your diet.
That's we are not having enough protein.
Enough protein and energy. So you have children, especially children under the age of 5, getting down with kwashiorkor, marasmus. That's undernutrition. Another arm of undernutrition is we're not getting enough micronutrients. And when we talk of micronutrients, we're talking about minerals and vitamins. So, and for instance, there's a case in Nigeria now where there's a prevalence of anemia amongst women and children because they're not getting enough iron in their diets. So you see, that's That's part of our problem.
Yeah.
And then we also have overnutrition,
Malnutrition.
which has led to a lot of non-communicable diseases that we see in our society today. You're consuming too much of sugar. Before you know it, especially the industrial sugar, you're getting down with diabetes. Obesity. And there's hardly a household where you don't even find someone who is dealing with diabetes.
Or obesity.
Exactly, and obesity.
Yeah.
And there's also the issue of high salt intake, which has triggered hypertension in a whole lot of people. A lot of Nigerians are battling with hypertension. In fact, last year was so peculiar that we had people slumping, prominent people slumping and dying in meetings.
And when you find out, you realize
it's either hypertension or cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease as heart disease. And then you have a lot of people who are down with stroke. It's a product of
the kind of intake.
Exactly.
The food they eat.
They are all products of malnutrition.
Okay.
If you're eating too much of sugar, too much of salt, too much fats and processed foods, you get down with these non-communicable diseases, which is as a result of malnutrition. Right? So it's in terms of where we are in Nigeria, on the subject of malnutrition, everybody's affected. However, the most vulnerable population are women and children, especially children under the age of 5 years. Because at that stage, the body requires a lot of nutrients. Children they're growing,
they
are developing. Exactly, there's a lot of growth and development going on. So there's a need for nutrients, and not just amongst children, even adolescents. You see, because that's why sometimes even early, when a female gets pregnant at adolescent age, as early as 12, 13,
doesn't happen.
Exactly, in her teenage age, it also contributes to malnutrition. Because at that stage, her body needs nutrients. The child in the womb is also competing for nutrients. So at the end of the day, when she gives birth to a low birth weight baby, also contributing to malnutrition. So the most vulnerable groups are women and children.
Interesting.
So in the Nigerian context, just as we said earlier, we are suffering from a triple burden. There's a high prevalence of undernutrition. Based on a report from UNICEF, it was reported that 1 in 3 children are suffering from malnutrition that is linked to poverty and food insecurity.
Wow.
So that report is literally saying that the economic situation is unfavorable. Families are unable to afford nutritious and adequate diets. Because it's one thing to eat just to be full. It's another thing to eat a diverse and adequate diet.
A balanced diet.
Exactly. So a healthy diet, of course, should have whole grains, you should have fruits, you should have vegetables, you should have protein, egg, and all of that. But how many households today can afford an adequate diet? And in every household, of course, the head of the household, possibly a man, possibly it could be a woman too, the head of the household may have access to go out of the home and make some income, but the child does not. The child depends on whatever is brought home and prepared at home.
That's true.
That's part of what contributes to the vulnerability of children in the subject of malnutrition. So in Nigeria, like I said, we have a huge burden of malnutrition. Presently, 1 in 3 children are malnourished.
But when you're talking about 1 in 3 children are malnourished, especially in a family, what of a family that is wealthy enough to provide food? Are you saying that these children intentionally avoid eating balanced diet, or what can be? Because when you mention in a family at least one is malnourished, what do you mean by that?
Now, bringing your attention back to the fact that when we talk of malnutrition, we're not only talking about often when we talk of malnutrition, we always our mind goes to undernutrition. The child who has kwashiorkor or marasmus, we are forgetting that child that has obesity. That's also a form of malnutrition. Because yes, the food is available, but now you're giving the child more than the body
More than-
requires.
Okay.
You're feeding the child excess protein, excess
Carbohydrates.
calories, exactly.
Mm.
And then maybe in their lunch pack, they're having a lot of ultra processed foods, sugary drinks, salty snacks, and all of that. That's why nowadays you begin to see that as a product of such poor nutrition, you're giving them more than they need or less than they require. For the case of children who are obese or having more than they need, nowadays you have children coming down with hypertension. These are things we never used to hear about before. That was common within the aged population. But now children go to the hospital and they're diagnosed of diabetes because in their everyday lunch pack they snack on sugary drinks. You see children getting down with hypertension because in their everyday lunch packs, now parents do not prepare meals from scratch. They do not prepare nutritious meals from scratch.
Food.
Exactly. You have children taking noodles to school, which are ultra processed foods. And all these ultra processed foods, they are either high in salt, high in sugar, or high in unsaturated fats. So at a very early age, you have children coming down with non-communicable diseases. And when children start coming down with this kind of diseases, then what happens to the nation's economy? Because these things it has an impact on the economy, right?
Yeah. If
we do not have a healthy and a productive people, if Nigerians are not healthy and they are not productive, it impacts on our economic, our gross domestic product.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people will now be calling in sick.
Yeah.
People who should work a 9 to 5 now cannot do that.
That's true.
And that impacts on our productivity as a nation. So you see that these things it's complex. The subject of malnutrition is complex, and unfortunately there's inadequate awareness because a lot of our policy makers think that nutrition is just about food. But it's more than that.
Yeah.
Because when a child is malnourished at a very early age, for instance, a child that is stunted, maybe a child that should have the height of a 5-year-old, who is having the height of a 3-year-old. When a child is stunted, his cognitive development is also impaired.
Oh, wow.
And then in the future, you're having dull children. And then you come out to start wondering why they cannot pass WAEC at one sitting. Wow. It's still a product of malnutrition. So these things have economic impacts.
And social impacts.
Social impacts, exactly. So it's multifaceted.
Wow, interesting. So what are those key factors contributing to malnutrition in Nigeria? Because we know definitely there are factors that may have led to malnutrition.
Now, there's a lot of banditry and terrorism going on in the country where farmers cannot access their farms. Farmers are getting killed or kidnapped in the farms. So people cannot go into the bushes and into the forest to farm because they are scared for their lives. They have to stay within the town, and you have insufficient land space within the town. Most of the lands are actually within the bushes. So you see that these are contributing factors. In fact, in some places where terrorism has taken over, these farmers have been displaced and now they are in IDP camps.
Exactly. They can't farm. There's not enough food anymore.
Exactly. So you see that right now in Nigeria, we're suffering from a food shortage. And that's part of why food is expensive.
That's true.
Because a lot of farmers cannot go to farm. They cannot access their farms. Some of them have been displaced.
Yeah.
And then there's also the issue of poor economic policies. If the economic policies are unfavorable, such that the earning power of the citizens is actually very low, and healthy diets are very expensive.
So how can afford
people
it.
Exactly. You see that contributes too. In fact, even gender norms. So in some cultures, the father, when you kill maybe a chicken, the father gets the lap, the head of the household gets the lap and the best part, and then the children get the legs, the legs and the head. And you see that the children are getting malnourished, and they are the ones who actually need the protein.
In fact, and they'll tell you that that's cultural.
That's
belief.
culture.
Yeah, like
exactly.
In the Igbo setting, they will say the first one, should, if it's a boy, or if it's a male, you should be given the
You can
if it's a
imagine that.
girl, you should be given the buttock.
So you see that the culture has also
Like, it's
contributed.
crazy.
In some cultures,
Yeah.
in fact in most cultures,
Mm.
as a woman, when you cook, you eat last.
Yeah, that's
You
true.
feed everybody first,
Ensure everybody has.
and you eat what is left in the pot.
You see?
And sometimes what is left in the pot is not sufficient. It's the remnant. Because sometimes the meat is finished, the veggies are finished, but you have to serve others before serving yourself. And as a woman, following the metabolic processes going on in your body, how much more if she's a pregnant mother or a lactating mother, she doesn't get enough food. She has to eat what is left.
That's true.
All the time after every meal. So you see that some of these gender norms contribute.
That's true.
And then early, like teenage pregnancy, also contributes, like we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So there are quite a lot of factors, like we mentioned earlier. There are a lot of factors contribute to it. So tackling malnutrition requires a multi-sectoral approach. There has to be an approach to address food insecurity. There has to be an approach that promotes education, especially of the girl child. So that at least if she can go to school, maybe till secondary school, by then she'll be approaching 16, 17, even if she wants to get married afterwards. It will not be early teenage.
That's true.
Yeah, so it's multi-sectoral. There has to be also there has to be proper monitoring and enforcement of food policies. Because it's one thing to draft a policy in black and white. It's another thing
to implement it.
So we have a lot of beautiful policies that are not well implemented because measures are not, there's poor infrastructure when it comes to monitoring these policies and enforcing them.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
And so one of such policies is, for instance, you may be able to control the level of salt that you use in preparing your food at home because you don't want to have hypertension.
Yeah.
But are you sure of what you're eating outside from the food industry?
It's true.
The food industry will tell you, bouillon cubes is made from natural food, natural spices and all of that. But when you check the nutrient fact, it's high in sodium.
Exactly.
And it's so high in sodium that it can trigger high blood pressure.
It's true.
And high blood pressure, of course, is and cardiovascular disease, heart disease, stroke, kidney failure, like they work together.
Hand in hand, it's true.
So you see, there has to be policies that hold the food industry accountable. Don't tell people this thing contains nutrients when it contains something else.
All right, I think we're going so fast and I'm enjoying this topic, but we're going to go on a short break, and when we return, we're going to talk more on the policies and how it could be implemented, especially the decision makers. So if you're watching this, is Health to Foster. We're going to go on a short break, and when we return, we'll continue with this topic. Thank you. Alright, viewers, welcome back, and we have a nutritionist who has been teaching us on how we can address malnutrition in Nigeria. So before we went on a short break, we were talking about how the policies that our decision makers will make and how it could be implemented. So take us through on that.
Well, Nigeria actually has a multi-sectoral action plan for food and nutrition, right? And that is a 5-year strategy that is aimed at reducing malnutrition by 50% in the year 2025.
Okay.
So these policies are centered around improving exclusive breastfeeding, improving food security, and we also have other policies that speak to the area of I've mentioned improving food insecurity. That's maybe through food security, and then I have mentioned improving exclusive breastfeeding. So there's also there's another policy area that talks about improving tackling micronutrient deficiencies, as well as treatment of severe acute malnutrition. So these policies are actually in place, and they are focused. I'll say that they are focused on tackling undernutrition and micronutrient deficiencies. Yeah. And I think we also have to get to a point whereby we review these documents to also address, put in place, address the issue of overnutrition. Like I said, in Nigeria, there's a lot of attention on undernutrition and micronutrient deficiencies. However, we're leaving out overnutrition, which is causing
hypertension,
cardiovascular disease, and a whole lot of that. These are also products of malnutrition, so we should have policy interventions addressing that. So as Kappa, like I said,
but before you move to talking about addressing it, what program or policy exists now in Nigeria to combat this malnutrition in Nigeria? Well, you can go ahead and tell us what Kappa does as well.
Yeah, so I can speak clearly on the policy that Kappa is actually working on.
Okay.
And it's tailored towards tackling overnutrition.
Okay.
Helping Nigerians to reduce the consumption of nutrients of concern, which is salt or sodium, because sodium is a nutrient in salt. And salt is the primary source in which almost all Nigerians get sodium from.
Yeah.
So don't get me wrong, sodium is actually important for our nervous system, controlling of water balance and all of that within the tissues. However, there's an amount of sodium that is required, and it's a very minute amount for our body to function optimally. Unfortunately, for instance, according to the World Health Organization, we are not expected to consume more than 5 grams of salt per day. And when I talk of 5 grams of salt per day, that small teaspoon that we use in stirring our tea.
Yes.
It shouldn't fill it up. It shouldn't even fill it up.
So when you're talking about that 5-gram spoon right now, we eat different type of food, so we don't even know the quantity of salt in those food that we eat.
Yes.
So how can we ascertain that 5 grams?
Yes.
Should not exceed.
So the ways to do that, because in that 5 grams, it contains 2 grams of sodium.
Okay.
And we're not expected to eat more than 2 grams per day. And the sources, the avenues through which we consume this sodium is in the salts or bouillon cubes that we use to prepare our meals.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, bouillon cubes contains more sodium than salt.
Yeah.
But a lot of Nigerians do not know. Some will tell you, I don't eat salt. I eat more of bouillon cubes. But bouillon cubes, bouillon cubes, the seasoning cubes now, is even worse. Contains more sodium than salt.
Why? Is it because of the protein that is being used or what?
No. Bouillon cubes, some bouillon cubes contain monosodium glutamate.
Okay.
Some of it apart from monosodium glutamate, it contains sodium inosinate. It contains even salt that contains sodium.
Wow.
And then in every meal, you're adding bouillon cubes. You understand? And then before you know it, I think per 100 grams of bouillon, you have some products have like 27,000 milligrams of sodium.
Wow.
Which is high.
That's high actually.
And the traditional Nigerian food, you add bouillon, you add salt, you still add other seasonings that possibly contain sodium. And then all our natural and unprocessed foods already contain sodium.
That's really high.
Yeah, so you see that at the end of the day, you're consuming sodium, which is a nutrient which the body needs, but now you're consuming too much.
Wow.
So what Kappa is now doing is we're putting policies in place to help Nigerians checkmate the quantity of sodium that they consume in a day. So last year, a national guideline for sodium reduction in Nigeria was developed. So that national guideline will help, we set up a technical working group consisting of different parastatals in Nigeria. Both government, non-governmental stakeholders, and even the private sector. And what we want to achieve is we want to set mandatory salt targets
Okay.
for processed and packaged foods.
Hmm.
In other words, if you're producing a processed or a packaged food, that's an industry-made food,
Yeah.
there's a limit of salt that you must not exceed.
Okay.
So if your product already exceeds that limit, you have to start reformulating to reduce it.
Wow.
So that even if Nigerians are buying this food from outside, now they are sure that they are taking lower sodium.
Okay. Hmm.
Also, we'll have educational programs. We hope to.
Okay.
The guideline also addresses, awareness, public and policy maker awareness, like consumer and policy maker awareness, whereby consumers become aware that too much of salt is bad in your diet, it causes hypertension, cardiovascular disease, stroke, and kidney failure, and then people start adjusting their behaviors.
Yeah.
And then the Ministry of Education will also help to incorporate salt reduction messages into the school curriculums. Because we've had cases of children telling their parents that, Mommy, I don't want this food, it's salty. They taught us in school that it can do,
Yeah.
So it's like I said, it's multi-sector, exactly. It's multifaceted.
Yeah.
So that's what CAPA is doing. That aside the aspect that speaks to tax on sugar, sweetened beverages, and then in addition to that, of course, like I mentioned earlier, there's a policy on community-based, that it speaks to addressing treatment of severe acute malnutrition in children under the age of 5. So if you go to primary healthcare facilities, you see that some primary healthcare facilities in some states where there's a very high prevalence of severe acute malnutrition, at the primary healthcare facility, the children are provided with treatment and care. So these policies actually put in place both curative treatment programs as well as preventive programs. Even the Ministry of Agriculture, I think they roll out programs sometimes. They also have policies that speak to agriculture sensitive nutrition. In other words, they are implementing agricultural programs that will help families improve protein, increase their protein intake, increase their vegetable intake, or targeting certain vulnerable populations with such interventions. So I think there's quite a lot going on.
Yeah, I think I was just, something was going through my mind. I just remembered while I was going in secondary school, there's a place I was staying in, and the kind of water we drink was kind of salted water. The water had the taste of salt.
Yeah.
So in areas that have the salt water, and that's the type of water people consume in that community, how do you now manage the sodium consumption? Because I know that salt, there's it's not as if they pour salt in that water. Naturally, that water has a taste of salt. The water is salty. If you bath without water, when your body dries, you see sprinkles of salt on your skin. You understand? So imagine people in such rural setting. So now we're talking about how we can reduce sodium, right?
Yeah.
Sodium intake. Yeah. So how do you manage in such communities that kind of the kind of water they take there is salted
water.
So
that's quite a complex situation. However, I know that natural foods that contain sodium do not contain it in very high quantities.
Okay.
Sodium from natural sources. Like I said earlier, all unprocessed foods contain sodium. So I also want to extend that belief to say that if that salted water may not contain as much sodium as, like, it may not be as high as being able to cause. I'm not actually very sure on that, but I know that all natural sources of food contain sodium. So what people in that area can actually do is avoid any added source of sodium.
Like people now when they cook, they don't even put
exactly
salt
so it's exactly so in such areas you have to avoid any external source of sodium, like salt, like bouillon, or even consuming ultra processed foods that can further trigger
Consumption of sodium.
It's good consumption of sodium.
Interesting. So, trying to implement this as an NGO, what are the challenges that you face? Because I know it's not going to be an easy one. You're trying to collaborate with the government sector, trying to ensure that they implement the sodium reduction in that food consumption. What are those challenges people face in trying to carry out the stats?
Well, in implementing food policies,
Yeah.
sometimes maybe some of the challenges that may be encountered could be around maybe political will
Okay.
or political interests. Sometimes you may, this is not to say that's the case here,
Okay.
but in some cases, because we're talking generally on food policies now, not just the salt reduction policy. So some of the challenges that could hinder the implementation of some of these policies is if the interest of maybe government is with the food industry.
Okay.
I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm saying we're mentioning challenges
At
that
least
could
that's
hinder.
what I'm trying to explain. Whether is it what people are presently facing? Like I want to know whether it's a challenge people are facing now to see if it can be implemented.
Well, that's not, no. I think one of the major challenges that could be faced in implementing maybe salt reduction policies, maybe the area of poor infrastructure when it comes to monitoring and enforcing the implementation of these policies. I think that can actually be a big bottleneck because now these policies have been put in place, these guidelines have been put in place, beautiful strategies have been put in place by experts. Now, implementation is the issue.
Okay.
Not just penning it down on paper, on black and white, but how do we now get what is written in the book to function optimally, excellently to be implemented well on the ground. So that's where the area of agencies and policymakers need to put measures in place to see that these policies are not only properly monitored, but also properly enforced.
Well, interesting. If you keep talking, we'll keep going on, and it's really a very interesting topic. And I must say, we cannot finish this whole discussion for today. So it is. It's been Mrs. Bukola Odele, a nutritionist with Kappa, and she's also a program officer for food policy program, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the program Health 247. She has been able to enlighten me, especially in the area of malnutrition, because the one she was telling me before, she told me that I only focus more on, you mentioned the undernutrition, because me, I used to think malnutrition is only the aspect of undernutrition, but she was able to enlighten me on the various aspects of malnutrition. So thank you very much for being on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we hope to see you on and on this kind of topic. At least you enlighten our audience, our viewers,
Thank you. I look forward to more collaborations with you.
Yeah, it's lovely. So, alright viewers, it's been our nutritionist on Kappa, and she has been able to take us through on this topic, addressing malnutrition in Nigeria. And we hope to see you more of our episodes, which will be coming your way. If this is your first time of watching this program, you can just sit back and watch us on Rapid TV channel 106, showing all Star Times. Or you can just go on our social media handle on official Rapid TV. So this is time. We're going to say a goodbye to you on this very edition, and see you next time and same time. Bye bye.